Hello, folks, and welcome back to another edition of Giant Talk. I'll start off by saying that perhaps we're not releasing episodes quite as frequently as we have done in the past, but we really are focusing now on quality over quantity. And today, I hope the quality really comes through because we are extremely lucky to have an hour's worth of a CEO's time. Everybody who works with and in larger organizations knows that a CEO's time is like gold dust. And I'm really pleased to have Jonathan Elliot with us today, who, full disclosure, we met through networking. We're both members of the same professional network. And when Jonathan found out that we, as in Derby Giants, focuses on OKRs, he was like, oh, we've got to talk. I've used these before. We've got to talk. So I thought, fantastic. You know, there's some insights, and to get the CEO's perspective, I think is going to be a really interesting one for you all to hear. So, Jonathan, welcome to Giant Talk. You bring with you your extensive experience as a CEO, both, nationally and internationally. Please, please tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you've done thus far.
Well, Roger, thank you very much. I was really, really excited when I met you, and you're quite right. We were at a networking event, and straight after that, we got on a call to talk about the things we've done over the years using OKRs. And so it's a real pleasure to be here. I built a career in 3 different phases. I started off, just putting into perspective, in the commercial domain, in sales and marketing, working for large corporates, very much managing teams of a few hundred people typically. I then went into strategy consulting. So the second phase, I refer to that as the kind of advisory and influencing stage of my career, where I was working with the FTSE and Fortune, typically 100 PLCs and the likes, with their boards in terms of organizational strategy and how to execute that. And then the last third of my career has been very much in the leadership space. And I've worked for 2 very large corporates. My penultimate company had 650,000 people, putting it into perspective.
Good grief.
And, recruiting 100,000 people a year. And then I just finished a 4-year, really enjoyable stint in an organization where I was leading a portfolio of 35 legal entities sitting across 23 different countries. And those legal entities had turnovers of anything from 10 million up to $350 million per year each. So really, this notion of how do you manage to put OKRs into large groups, complex groups, but also work with them from small $10 million turnover companies up to $300-400 million turnover companies. I've tried it all out. I've learned from a few things along the way, and I found it to be really, really helpful way as a CEO of running businesses.
Really interesting. Let's kind of just wind ourselves up a few levels here. You talk about organizations of, I would say, significant size and significant complexity. And yes, you used OKRs with them, but what would you say was the challenge that you were trying to solve that OKRs were actually the answer to?
So I don't think that OKRs are the only answer. I see them very much as part of a set of solutions, and I'd like to talk to that in a few moments. But typically the sorts of challenges that I face, there are 3 types. One of which is you've got to scale the business. So here you're talking about how do you augment your revenues, maybe how do you do that through organic and inorganic? So this notion of mergers and acquisitions, how do you integrate organizations that you've just bought? So there's a big question here around, scaling operations, getting the efficiency and the cultural alignment. That's one typical problem. It's very seldom that you get brought in and told, don't grow the business. The first thing is grow the business.
Yeah.
The second thing is, in order to do that, you normally have to transform the business. And I'll come back a little bit on that later, but you've got to get teams aligned, you've got to overhaul the processes, and you've got to do that in a way that isn't disruptive. So you've got to transform the business and make it more effective and more efficient. And then the third problem is one that you typically have but don't seek out, which is what I call crisis management. So you're always going to have those operational disruptions. You're always going to have a reputational challenge that comes along that nobody had foreseen. And making sure that you're able to be transparent in the communication of those activities is the third piece. So the scaling, the transforming, and just managing the business and the crises that come along.
And it's very easy for those things that fall into the crisis management basket for them to completely blow all the others off course, isn't it?
Absolutely. So it needs to be structured. And I think that comes back to another core belief that as a leader I have. And this is my belief. I'm not saying that it's the only way to lead a business, but there's a lovely word that talks about leaders being but trusted servants. So at one end of the spectrum, you have people like myself who probably believe that we would like to be our best in the form of a trusted servant that is serving the purpose of the organization as well as the people in it, because that's important. And at the other end of that spectrum, you probably have people who are more autocratic, looking to telling people what to do. And one of the things that I've loved about the OKR system is that when you agree the OKRs, we're all clear on what we're trying to achieve. We're all clear on what we're trying to do. And that suits my leadership style very well.
Yeah, a very servient style, as you say. Yeah, okay. All right. So, okay, really complex organizations. What kind of, give us a flavor, give us a sense as to the kind of organizational challenges that you feel you faced in trying to implement OKRs in those highly complex international organizations?
So, as I said before, some of those organizations have been very big. I by my standards, an entity of 350, 400 million, that's quite a big business. But some of them have also been very small. Less than 10 million is not tiny, but it's small. And in all of those businesses, you tend to find, I could say, a set of principles that I adhere to. And the first we've talked about a little bit, which is this notion of servant leadership, right? So getting people aligned to a purpose and then helping those people get there. I always see it as creating a vision and then making sure everyone's roles are clear. And my job then becomes very simple. It's just to remove the roadblocks. Servant, I'm there to let them do their best thing and be their best selves. So that in itself is a challenge that's consistent. And OKRs can definitely help with that. I think the second core belief I have, which is very fundamental, is that it's either you adapt or you fade. Now, this belief is kind of the Darwinian principle that you've got to constantly adapt, you've got to evolve. But with things like generative AI coming along now, the need to be agile, to be outcome focused, you need organizations. And you can be the nice guy, but at the end of the day, if you're not agile, you're not competitive, you're not outcome focused, people are going to lose their jobs and we're all going to go home. So that adapt or fade principle is really important. And I think the third thing that possibly comes from my earlier training, I have degrees in maths and engineering and business administration, but this notion of data, being data driven, so data over ideology. So it's really important to be focused on the future, to have metrics that tell you whether you are getting to that future state that you're so keen to arrive, and not just look in the rearview mirror and say, oh, I had a great month last month, so everything's got to be okay next month. Yeah. Because the world is changing so fast, you need that data-driven and not just that ideology deeply ingrained into DNA.
And this is the interesting thing that I find around measurement of or the different types of measures. It's quite incredible just how limited the understanding is about the right type of measure to use at a particular given time or for a particular purpose. And like you say, certain measures can help to indicate that you're on the right track and are sort of far more forward-looking than they are rearward-facing, like a typical traditional financial KPI. Doing some work with an organisation at the moment, which has a huge amount of resource and is very long-term in focus, but they are really, really struggling to put some very clear metrics in place for their long-term, and I mean kind of 3 to 5 year goals that they're setting for themselves, because they've never really been challenged to measure themselves over that period, and kind of trying to come up with the data points that represent strategic progress at that level is a challenge. Is a real challenge, because a lot of organizations just haven't been used to. They're used to kind of measuring over, 3 months, 12 months, and so on and so forth. But kind of going beyond that is a big one. Have you found that in experience?
I've found that, and I think I'd like to talk to you very much about where OKRs fit into the process, if you like. Because if you are someone who believes in uniting as a leader, uniting people against a common purpose, so basically you're saying, this is the mountain we're going to climb, and everyone agrees this is the mountain we're going to climb, and we're not quite sure how we're going to do it. We've got a few good ideas, and we're going to make a few mistakes, and we'll change course a little bit on the way up and the way down, but we know where we're going, and we all want to get there.
Yeah.
That's a great way to unite a large workforce. But where do the OKRs fit into that? So for me, the first thing is you need a vision. And to support that vision, you really do need a strategy. So the vision is, this is where we're going to get to. And the strategy is a little bit of, this is the 3-year roadmap. And these days, 3 years is probably about as far as we're going to get. But this is the 3-year roadmap that is going to get us there. So that's the first part. Without that, you can't even start looking at your OKRs. You need to know what the strategy is, and you need to align to that. The second bit is, what are those objectives and key results? So the high impact objectives that align to the strategy with, as you said, identifiable and measurable outcomes. And the third part is you need the incentive. You need then people to actually execute on those OKRs. And if you don't have that vision, strategy, OKRs and incentives, it all starts falling apart really quickly, because it becomes a piece of paper that goes on a bookshelf somewhere.
Okay, so can I just, on that final point around incentives, because I have to say it's probably one of the hottest potatoes in the OKR basket. That many OKR gurus have written about and said you should never put OKRs anywhere near any sort of incentive or reward, and so on and so forth. Really curious about how you've squared that off, perhaps, in the past.
I don't actually disagree with that. I don't think the incentives are necessarily directly aligned to individual OKRs. I think the incentives are aligned towards getting us to this, executing the strategy well, getting us to that vision that we have seen. Now, I'll tell you why, in my experience, I'm decoupling the incentives from this notion of incentivizing people to execute the strategy well versus, giving them extra bonuses for reaching specific OKRs. And the reason is a simple one. OKRs I use to stretch the organization, to make the organization its best self.
Yeah.
And if I'm sitting with governing a management team, and all our OKRs are green, I'm actually going to go back and say, we're not stretching ourselves anymore. We're not pushing something that could drive growth. All the levers that are on the table are under control. We need to add in or substitute one of those green OKRs. We need to replace it with another one, which is going to stretch us.
Yes.
And that notion of the aim isn't to be green on your OKR sheet. The aim is to execute the strategy well. And the OKRs are there to support that execution. I think it's a very, very important takeaway for me.
I think, I cannot disagree with you. 100% with you on that. Did you find, though, that when you were, basically giving the message that green isn't always good, isn't always what we want, did you find that was kind of quite unsettling, quite uncomfortable for people, quite alien for people to get their head around?
In my experience, and I've done this at many different organizations, and we've talked about this, Roger, but one of my learnings is that it's an incremental change that's required.
Yeah.
If I turn up and put down 10 OKRs in front of every country on day one, and I've got these 35 different businesses I'm trying to grow, I'm going to have some explosions without any doubt somewhere. So it's very much, let's try with a light touch model. People like it. They start seeing the benefits. Then we make it a little bit heavier touch, and then we put more effort into it. So it's a progressive thing. I think there's one other element that's really important to this, which is part of the issue is that we don't always have the data. So it's great to say, this is the OKR table we're going to track ourselves against. But at the same time, a lot of the effort is behind the scenes, is trying to get the data and trying to ideally automate that data gathering by tunneling into different databases, getting APIs up and so forth. And that takes time, and we've got to give people time to do that, because otherwise they don't have time to do the day job. So starting at a gentle level and then ramping it up, but always focusing on what is it that we want to be measuring, as opposed to what is the data we have. And that's just something I've learned through many decades now of experience. Never start with the as is. Start with where you want to be. Start with what is going to move the dial, and don't settle for just using the data you have that's easy and because it's to hand this afternoon.
And just going back to that example I gave a few moments ago of the client that's finding it challenging to measure on a longer term strategic basis, that's exactly the challenge they're working through at the moment. That's not something that they've been used to. It's not something they have the data for at the moment. So they're putting a lot of time and effort into establishing that data. And we also see that at all levels when we're putting in OKRs, whether it's on a shorter term tactical one or on a midterm, 12-month one, that the data points aren't necessarily there. So sometimes, ironically, the OKR can be about establishing the data source and setting the baselines to start off with. So yeah, I completely get that. And kind of just thinking about the incentives being more about executing the strategy well. Excuse me. We tend to advise clients that if there is a real desire to create some sort of incentive link into OKRs, that it should focus really on the behaviors that are exhibited in terms of the working of those OKRs. Are you working collaboratively? Are you kind of stretching yourselves? Are you perhaps even being innovative, if that's what the focus of the OKRs are? So that's kind of what we try to get clients to focus on in that respect. Okay, so just moving on, through your extensive experience of deploying OKRs and seeing them in use, what have you come to recognise as the benefits and breakthroughs that you've seen from using them?
Well, I can come back to what are the benefits, so I'll answer your question, but I'd like to then explain something about another thing that I think is crucial to make them work. So the benefits that I typically look for is, certainly as a CEO, you're looking for, the first one would be alignment. So I'm looking to link that strategy through to execution, Roger, which is what we've spoken about a number of times here, and making sure that all the efforts are focused on the right goals. The second thing is that goes beyond alignment is let's focus really on what is needed. So how do we stay proactive? How do we stay agile? How do we stay outcome orientated? And the third thing it's allowed me to do is introduce stretch goals, because I think ambitious OKRs really do foster that notion of continuous improvement, push the organization to achieve its potential. It's not a question of we've met the OKR. The question is, as soon as we've met the OKR, we're probably going to replace it with the next one, which is just a little bit more. So that alignment, that focus, and that stretch is really important. But if I may, I'd like to come back to something a little bit different, which is when I look at OKRs, which areas am I looking to create them in. So I'm going to try and give you some examples of that. I have a particular model that I built out with MIT when I was working with the scissor group over a decade ago. And we started building a model on business transformation. How do we transform businesses? And we concluded that there were 5 things that we needed to look at. And these 5 questions are questions that I ask in every time I go into any organization, no matter how big, no matter how small.
Right.
And I'd like to talk you through those 5. But the reason I'm going to talk you through those 5 is that I think the OKRs need to make sure that all 5 of these components of this transformation model are moving forward. And the reason I say that is that I see it a little bit like a set of cogs. If one of the 5 isn't working, the model's broken.
Right.
The value will not flow and everything falls over. So for me, it's really important that all 5 are moving forward. It's no point in having perfection in 4 out of 5 if one of the 5 is completely inoperable. Am I making a bit of sense so far, Roger?
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm dying to hear what the 5 questions are.
The 5 questions I ask myself. The first one is, where do we want to play? This is probably summarized by the word ecosystem. So this is all about how do I position the organization within high growth markets? How do I adapt to changes in value chains? All the stuff that AI is doing today. A sample OKR might be, increase AI-driven products revenues by 25% in the next year. Something like that. So where are we going to play? We're in the ecosystem. First question. The second question is, how am I going to make money? And I refer to that as a business model. So here we're talking about how do we optimize the efficiency. How do we really understand how to build a business around our value proposition? How do we make sure that we focus on our core competencies, which means that we're going to outsource stuff that's not core?
Yeah.
An example OKR there might be, I'm making this up, but we're going to outsource 30% of non-core activities to external providers within the next 9 months. So now I know where I'm going to play and I know how I'm going to make money. The third question I ask is, how am I going to engage with my stakeholders whilst I'm making money in that new ecosystem? So the stakeholder set, it depends, but it's typically your customers, your employees, and in many cases, I do a lot of work in private equity. In the private equity space, we definitely include our investors.
Yeah.
As one of our stakeholder sets. So you might be looking at, for example, in enhancing the employee value proposition. You might be talking about sample OKR might be to achieve a 90% employee satisfaction rate in the end of year annual survey. So again, you've got happy stakeholders, you're making money, you know where you're going to play. But as you look through all of those 3 questions, you start seeing that your organization needs a certain set of capabilities. Mm-hmm. So to play in that value chain, to make that money, to look after those stakeholders, you need a set of capabilities. And you need to organize those capabilities. So that capability might be, I'm going to make this up a little bit, it might be that you need to have good market insight and you may need to be able to sell data to some of your partners, for example. Now, the question that comes around that is when I talk about how do you organize yourself, what is the operating model going to look like? You could use people to do that. You could, offshore it and have a whole lot of people doing those processes manually. You could optimize your current processes. You could bring in technology sets that automate all of that. So how you build your operating model is a very significant piece of work. Mm-hmm. The sort of OKRs that you would have there would be, I'm going to develop and deploy 3 AI-driven tools that are going to enhance operational processes by the end of Q2. Something like that. So you've now understood what capabilities you need. And the last piece is, am I executing well? And then you start getting into some of the lagging KPIs, the financials, for example. Is my P&L following? Might be a very simple case of it. But also, do I have a transformation and innovation management office that is looking at making sure that I've got agile practices embedded into the organization and so forth. So I tend to find that if I know where I'm going to play the ecosystem, how I'm making money, the business model, how I'm looking after all my stakeholders, stakeholder engagement, how I'm organizing my capabilities, and I call that an operating model.
Yeah.
Then the execution will follow. But if any of those places are missing, you end up making money with a business model that's focused on a contracting market. It doesn't help you. Or you're making money, but all your employees are leaving because they're not happy to work there. You're going to have a problem. Or your operating model is such that nobody knows what their particular job description, everyone's falling over each other. It becomes a very inefficient organization. So the OKRs that explore and tease that out, both at a leading and a lagging level, for me is absolutely fundamental.
And I suppose it's the tool that you can use to connect. Like you say, I think you used the term before you introduced and shared those questions. It's about the value flow, isn't it? And I was just thinking, you can use OKRs to connect all these to show the flow through, the flow of value through them. Yeah.
It's about unlocking the full potential of the organization.
And that's the reason why I pivoted to focusing on OKRs, nearly 9 or 10 years ago now, because I could see that there was so much potential that was being missed or wasted, because there'd be some really great strategies and plans that were devised, but then when they came into contact with reality, and they just didn't, they didn't last. Arguably, people had tried to answer, leaders had tried to answer these 5 questions, but they hadn't then connected them with something like OKRs, which then meant there was a complete missed opportunity.
Well,
great.
I've run my own business mid-career. I set up my own business from nothing, and I used OKRs there. I run $1.8 billion of turnover with 25,000 employees and associates. I've used OKRs there. I think the size of the company really does not matter. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of staying focused. It's a way of aligning people, and it's a way of stretching the organization. And it's a fabulous tool. It's just got to be well implemented. Otherwise, the value doesn't flow.
Yeah, like all these things, it is all in the implementation. But what I also see as well is even if some areas of the business, perhaps those that are more transactional in nature, more less have less bandwidth, less opportunity to focus on transformational activity, even though they may not be sort of hands-on with the strategically aligned OKRs, you start to see elements of kind of the outcome-focused language coming through, and consequently the mindset. So people start to challenge: if we do this, actually, what's that going to give us? Is it worth doing in the first place? And so it kind of seeps through osmosis with the organisation. If they fully embrace it, it can genuinely become a culture change, can't it?
It can, and I think this softly approach that I talked about before, where you don't try and do everything in week one. I'm not saying it take years to get it in place, but allowing people to see the benefits of working towards common OKRs. I have never had a case where people love them on day one, and I've never had a case where after 6 months they didn't love them. So, love them might be a strong word, but see their value.
Yeah,
and it is a tool that has huge power to shift.
And from a change management point of view, because what you touch up on there is adoption. Yeah, from a change management point of view, I'm guessing from what you've shared around your leadership style, you have been quite public in kind of leading through example, publicly adopting them, being transparent. Have I read that right?
You have, and I give you another little example of that. So one of the challenges you can have in organizations is that people are afraid of making mistakes. So that's a culture of I suppose we could call it a blame culture, but there are organizations where there's little upside to doing amazingly well, but there's a lot of downside to making a mistake, and it can be quite career limiting. And I think it's very important to allow people to make mistakes. But ideally, I have a phrase that I love to learn from mistakes, but ideally somebody else's.
Wise people, very wise people do that.
So, but if I'm going to learn from somebody else's mistakes, they've got to talk about them. And if they're going to learn from my mistakes, I have to talk about them.
Yeah.
And equally, if I'm going to say to people, you're allowed to make mistakes, they're not going to believe me unless I start being public about the fact that I've made a few mistakes myself.
Yeah.
And ideally small ones. I don't like people that come at the end of the quarter and say, I missed all my numbers because. But I have a lot more sympathy for people that might come up after a couple of weeks saying, I've tried something, it hasn't quite worked out, I'm going to try to do it differently. What do you think?
Yeah.
So that notion of being transparent, being humble, learning from each other is a world that I'm not saying I do it perfectly by any means, but it's a world I'm very keen to participate in, because I think it's a nice environment to be part of.
Yeah, and because it is such a culture shift for many organisations, particularly where the message has been 100% on or it's a failure, I think it's really important for the senior leaders who are asking people to change to demonstrate that themselves first, because it sets the temperature, doesn't it, at the end of the day?
It does.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So, in terms of, from your perspective as CEO, can you just give us the top 2-3 benefits that you've seen? In what way have they been the most valuable? Where have you seen their greatest value, their greatest benefit?
I think I'll come back to the alignment, the focus, and the stretch. So if I take some of the more complicated worlds, and I think when you've got 25,000 employees and associates, that's a pretty complicated world, and they're in 23 different countries, and you have at least 2 or 3 completely different business models because they're in different sectors, and you've got all these companies you're trying to work out, how do I grow the portfolio? Aligning people is really important, and that means you've got to have a strategy. So first of all, you've got to go away and do some thinking. What is the vision? What is the strategy? And does everyone believe in it? Because if they don't believe in it, it's not going to go very far.
Yeah.
And I think the OKRs in themselves don't solve that, but the process I've talked through at the very beginning, where I referred to the fact that the process is very much about vision, strategy, objectives, key results, and incentives. If you follow that, then the OKRs are the bridge between the strategy and making sure people are incentivized to execute well. So that would be one thing. And the second is focus is really important. There are so many problems that exist concurrently within an organization.
Yeah.
And if you try to boil the ocean, you end up doing nothing. So let's agree on what we're going to fix this quarter or this half year, and let's focus on them. Let's, get them out of the way. And then let's, after that, agree on what we're going to do the following quarter. So it provides the forward-looking, outcome-oriented focus that I really think drives in a proactive and agile manner growth.
It's what we like to call spotlighting.
Yeah. You can't do everything.
Yeah. And too many organizations try, first of all, to use them as a floodlight and just apply OKRs to everything that moves. And that doesn't create any focus whatsoever. It just creates confusion. Yeah.
So we normally, I'm in favor of taking a maximum of, for a large organization, we'd never have more than 10 OKRs. And 5 of those would be lagging, which would be financial, which you'd be tracking anyway. Mm-hmm. It's the 5 leading OKRs that are actually the real nuggets, because that shows you what you can do to create future value. So I think if you've got the alignment of the focus, the next thing is how, the last thing that I touched on earlier as well is how do you get an environment where people are ambitious and they want to stretch their goals, right? So OKRs aren't static.
Yeah.
It's not that you've got a tick, you've got there. This is about how do we nourish and grow this business as best we can on a constant basis, continuous improvement to the organization. So I think it's really helped me in all three of those areas.
Fantastic. Jonathan, I mean, the like I say, having the CEO's perspective here is absolutely fantastic, because that view right from the top means more than anything in a larger organization. I mean, we also work with founders of much smaller, perhaps really high growth businesses as well, and that's fine speaking to them, but their domain is a lot smaller. And so I think what you brought to the table today and shared with our listeners is that perspective over a very large, multinational organization. So I'm hugely appreciative for that. Yeah, can we just kind of wrap up with you maybe sharing with our listeners, what you're focusing on now, where you're moving to, how they could perhaps even reach out to you if they'd like to connect?
So I'm very much an extrovert thinker. I love connecting with people, Roger, and that's how we met, through an event and discussing things and getting some real examples on the table from both of us. If people would like to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn. They've just got to look up Jonathan Elliot. That's JONATHAN, and my surname is ELLIOTT. So they'll find me there. I'm going to continue working both in the what we call the ExCo, so that's the executive committee, CEO, COO sort of space. I do that with private equity firms. I do it with multinationals. I do it with some SME as well. And if anyone would like input from me on any of those, or they need support in those sorts of roles, I'd love them to reach out. And equally, I do some non-exec advisory work, again, everything from PEs through to, limited companies, typically across Europe, frequently with companies that are growing in Europe, might have to acquire, might have to integrate, redefine some of the business model ecosystem plays that we've talked about before, and finally, need an operating model so that they execute well. But I'd love to continue the debate. I'm really grateful for today. I've enjoyed the questions. And if you need any more or any more specifics, Roger, I hope you come back. I look forward to continuing to collaborate.
And thank you for that, Jonathan. I'm sure I can say on behalf of our listeners, thank you so much for your insights and contributions today. As I said, having the CEO perspective is so rare and very, very appreciated. And yes, let's continue the conversation at the right point in future. So I shall call things to a halt today and say thank you very much for joining us. And to you listeners, thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Giant Talk. I hope you can join us again soon, when we shall be covering more around strategy execution. So take care, and we shall speak very soon. Thank you very much now.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you.